So I was like, okay, I'm never using software again. So I realized that like, I want to provide this ability to abstract all of the complexity of UI, because the UI is in this, we can go on forever about this. In the software development world with AI, the limiting factor now is designing UI for humans. That's the thing that takes the longest amount of time to do that. I want to get away from
All right, can you say that again? What takes the longest amount of time?
Designing for humans.
Yeah, designing for humans. That's the hardest part of the software engineering pipeline now. It takes the most amount of our time. Everything else, we've got massive amounts of AI tooling, but we sit there and we tinker with the UI for humans because you're dealing
Right.
with things
That's
like
so
that.
true.
And I'm like, I don't anymore. I just use it. Literally, I don't touch software anymore. I go get MCPs and I use the MCP because I can have a simple interface, which is conversational.
This is AI First with Adam and Andy, the show for leaders turning AI from a tool they're testing into a workforce they run. I'm Andy Sack alongside my co-host, Adam Brotman. Each episode, we bring you candid conversation with business leaders deploying real AI agents, what's actually working, what's not, and how they're rebuilding their companies around it. No fluff. Just real talk, actionable use cases, and insights you can use. Today's episode, we have a guest, an old friend of mine, Niel Robertson from Winslow, and we're going to get to him in just a moment. But what you'll be getting today is really a upfront conversation on HR and how the organization is changing, how the tools for HR is changing, and what AI and agents mean for HR and the org. With that, Niel, welcome to AI First with Adam and Andy.
Thanks, guys. I'm really excited to be here. So we just launched our product a couple weeks ago. So I'm very excited to talk about what we're doing.
Niel, give a brief background on you, but then talk about Winslow and what you launched.
Yeah, I mean, so Andy, you and I know each other because I sort of showed up in the early 90s in the Boulder, Colorado startup ecosystem, started hanging out with everybody, built a company there that ended up being kind of a right time, right place, first wave internet company, and continued on as a sort of a venture-backed entrepreneur over a number of different companies, worked at 3 different venture firms along the way as kind of a venture partner, have sat on sort of both sides of the table, done a lot of work with startup communities, startup programs like Techstars. I ended up helping bring Techstars to Australia here in the early days. And have had just a passion my whole life for being a product builder and also being a company builder. My personal background, I went to MIT. I have a CS degree from MIT. At various points in my life, I've either run companies or written software. And now I do both again, which is really fun, although nobody writes software anymore. So I tell agents to write software for me. And what's really fun about this moment in time is both of my itches get scratched. I get to build new and interesting products, but I also get to build companies in a totally different way. And it's a fun kind of like duality every day. So that's my background.
All right. So tell our audience about your recent venture and what the tool does.
Yeah. So Winslow is a complete rethink of the traditional payroll, benefits, HR, and operations software stack. People have been using the same software that was built between 10 and 20 years ago, kind of like the Gustos, Ripplings, Workdays of the year to do these sort of like tactical operations. And you get very quickly dragged into kind of an old school, hyper-clerical, non-scalable ways of doing things. AI completely revolutionizes the ability for people to use and run these pieces of software in a much different way. So Winslow is a completely AI native version. It means it's 100% conversational. It's 100% agentic. It's 100% extensible. And also it sort of pairs with kind of a next generation piece of functionality, which is kind of a AI coworker inside of Slack. Think of it like your chief of staff. And so not only are we kind of reinventing the core ways that traditional sort of payroll benefits software works, but also rethinking how that software can be meaningful to every employee in your business. One of the things I think is sort of crazy about the industry is HR software is one of the few pieces of software that every single employee has a site license for or has a license for, and almost none of them use during the year. And so you pay this exorbitant amount of money for software that everybody hates and doesn't use. We think it should be completely the opposite, where people are using their HR software on a daily basis to become more productive. And like we've introduced a product.
And who's the customer of the product?
So we serve 2 primary customers. In general, we serve kind of like 1 to 500 employees size companies. That's either first payroll. So that would be usually a startup CEO. He or she just got a little pre-seed money and wants to like do things in an official way. They need a payroll company. They would choose us over like a classic legacy vendor like Augusto or Rippling. We also work with companies that are starting to scale, and they might have used a company like a PEO, like a JustWorks or a TriNet, and it's getting way too expensive to have that kind of service provider anymore. They want their own software, and they're coming to us at 50 people or so because they know they're going to scale to a couple hundred. These days, it's a fractional HR person. Almost no one hires an HR in-house person anymore until you're much bigger. So it's a fractional HR person, which we could talk about, like the growth of fractional as like part of the ecosystem. It's like really interesting. So it's either like a CEO or usually a fractional HR person. That's
and generally smaller companies, not big enterprise.
Yeah, zero to 500, probably more densely in the 0 to 200. Sorry, in the 1 to 250 employee range. Companies' complexity sort of like grows in step functions, and once you go above 500 employees, a whole bunch of weird stuff starts to creep in, and it just makes the necessity of the platform a lot more complex.
So I wanted to provide our audience a little bit of context. I mean, Niel is an old friend and a great entrepreneur, builder. The reason that this episode came to be is we just launched Agents Inc. As part of Agents Inc., there was a lot in there about the HR function, the changing nature of companies and organization, as well as predictions about what's going to happen with labor. And as Adam and I spoke about it, we thought that would be really helpful to have someone who was sort of an expert in HR, and I thought of Niel. So with that context, I want to invite Adam into the conversation just with whatever question he has for Niel in the domain. Like, Niel's a builder. He's building for HR professionals. You heard his customer base. Like, tee us off on the more relevant conversation for our audience as it relates to HR or design, labor, wherever you want.
Okay, yeah, Niel, super interesting. I want to double click, so to speak, on your comment about conversational versus the way this software has been built for the last 10 or 20 years. And my question for you would be, first of all, just to kind of set the stage so I understand, but I'm wondering if our audience has the same question, which is like, okay, today, if I'm running a 50-person company and I don't really have head of HR, or I have one person that's head of HR and they're doing everything, they're using a Gusto or something. Mm-hmm. Do you come in and basically say like, yeah, instead of like deterministic software that captures information, puts it in a database somewhere, there's kind of like point, click, file, menu kind of interface for everybody. Is yours more, we're going to do the same thing that a lot of these other systems are doing, but instead of point, click, it's just through chat. And then they sometimes get like HTML emails. They sometimes get stuff that happens through the chat. But just kind of explain like from what to what a little bit more in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, let me give you a number of examples. So a way to think about our product is we've designed the product both for a sort of a die-in-the-wool HR person that might want to go in and use a user interface they're familiar with. So they might want to go do a payroll review in a pretty classic payroll review mechanism. But then also you've got this 100% conversational interface, which uses our underlying MCP tooling. And so for those that don't know, MCP tooling is the sort of way that agents talk to software now and figure out what they can accomplish. We have the most robust MCP tooling of any company in the industry, like from kind of like Workday to modern companies. Let me give you an example of like why that becomes powerful. Like, let's say that you are actually a 3-person company, you're the CEO, you got to do payroll. There's still like, just because like the software changes doesn't mean you don't need to understand all the regulation and complexity of it. And so say, for example, that you are hiring somebody new and in their offer letter, you decided to agree to give them a $150 gym membership. Or in California, you need to pay by law sometimes $50 of an internet and phone supplement to certain types of people. How do you get that into the payroll system actually in the right way? There's actually a big difference between pre-tax and post-tax deductions inside of payroll. And you have to kind of know categorically which thing you're dealing with falls into each category. An HR person has been doing this for like 10 years, would just know that because they've done it 100 times. A first-time CEO probably doesn't know or doesn't care. You go into Claude, which has all of the intelligence of the universe, and say, here's the offer letter, and I need to put them into Winslow. And it goes and it negotiates with their MCP tools, but then also goes and looks at the intelligence out on the internet to understand, you added the gym membership. That is a pre-tax deduction. I've got to put it in as a adjustment, not a reimbursement. And it negotiates with our system to get all that stuff into the database correctly. So it's not simply about the user interface and reducing all the complexity of trying to go find the right places. It's actually about the combination of user interface with domain knowledge that's very hard for someone that's not an expert to sort of navigate a traditional HR system and get things correct, because you can make these mistakes and they end up getting fined and penalized for them. That's kind of like one way to think about it from a simplistic perspective. You could work in Claude or you could work in Slack and get that done. But you could also hand a lot of the domain knowledge to Claude to figure out how to negotiate with our MCP to get correct. That makes sense?
Yeah. You know what it makes me think of as you're describing it? Like one of the interesting, like almost like unlocks of using AI for what you're describing is that, use your example. I'm a CEO with no domain experience or knowledge about HR. I don't have a separate HR person. There's both the domain knowledge of like a functional leader of HR, and then there's like the software to manage stuff. Because of the way you're describing this, I'm thinking in my head, tell me if I've got it right, you're sort of combining those things. You're like, well, why can't the CEO or the HR leader, instead of having a staff, they can basically go to this AI powered HR software, and it's like a combination of doing what the deterministic SaaS software systems would do, as well as what maybe somebody on their staff would do. And it's like a little bit of both at the same time. Is that right?
Yeah. Look, I've had a couple like significant epiphanies in the last 6 months that have formed my view of the world, if you'll indulge me to give them to you. So one of them was I was talking to someone and they needed my 409A, like fair market value. And I was like, okay, it's in Carta somewhere. I don't want to go digging around in Carta. I've done it before. I got to find it. So I went into Claude and I said, does Carta have an MCP? It's like, well, of course it does. So I just added the MCP and I said, go get my last FNV out of Carta. I never went into Carta. I never navigated their UI. Whether the UI was the winning design awards or the worst UI in the world, it doesn't matter to me anymore. I was able to extract the thing I wanted accurately. And I don't care that it's running asynchronously in the background. It took 2 or 3 minutes to do it. That's fine. So I was like, okay, I'm never using software again. So I realized that like, I want to provide this ability to abstract all of the complexity of UI, because the UI is in this, we can go on forever about this. In the software development world with AI, the limiting factor now is designing UI for humans. That's the thing that takes the longest amount of time to do that. And I want to get away from
All right, can you say that again? What takes the longest amount of time?
Designing for humans.
Yeah, designing for humans. That's the hardest part of the software engineering pipeline now. It takes the most amount of our time. Everything else, we've got massive amounts of AI tooling, but we sit there and we tinker with the UI for humans because you're doing
Right.
things
That's
like
so
that.
true.
And I'm like, I don't anymore. I just use it. Literally, I don't touch software anymore. I go get MCPs and I use the MCP because I can have a simple interface, which is conversational. That was like one big epiphany I had. The second big epiphany I had was about this understanding of the movement from kind of like first generation conversational functionality in SaaS software to second generation. I was using Linear to do something, to put a ticket in. And I opened up their chat just to kind of play with it. And I said, Linear, can you put in this feature request that I have, and do me a favor, go look at what is publicly available about Gusto and Rippling and do a feature analysis and put that into the ticket. And Linear went, what's a Gusto? And I was like, okay, that's interesting. That's V1 of chatbots where they don't understand the world. V2 of chatbots, which is how our product works, has all of the knowledge of Claude available to it to do anything. So if you say, hey, Winslow, go do something, and I need you to understand deeply about like COBRA regulation inside of California, that is part of your product. Like you have basically taken what I call the infinity machine and you brought it into the product. And like that's a big difference between architectures of AI native software that think about it's our software, our system of record, plus everything that Claude knows, and being able to bring that to bear for you because of how we've architected our system, versus older generation chat products like HubSpot's Breeze or Linear or whatever, who are kind of like locked into this world of like, they only understand their own product. And once you like start to realize next generation, like I can go into Cursor, for example, if I'm coding something, I can say, hey, I want to build this feature. Go take a look at 4 payroll systems out there and make sure that I'm adding the right functionality. And it knows how to do that because it's using the infinity machine of Claude or or whatever. Those 2 things form my view of the world. And in the HR world, it's very important because HR is a domain of subtlety. So for example, like I was just going through a termination process, an employee in California, but we're a Colorado company and they'd only been with the company for a little bit. So you have to abide by like Colorado, like mini COBRA laws in terms of if COBRA available. There's like all this massive amount of subtlety that goes into just like hitting the termination button. That can now be part of my product because Claude knows how to interpret all of that, talk to my MCP and configure everything correctly for me. So there's no amount of UI that I could build in the traditional sense that would have gotten that amount of functionality into a startup CEO's hands. And now I can, which completely changes the way that I design software, knowing that like the infinity machine of knowledge is sitting there. and I can connect it to my product, if that makes sense. It's a completely not only game-changing way to think about how software works.
While you're talking about your product, let me just name it. A lot of our users will not know necessarily what Linear is, MCP, right? Like Niel as a guest is a MIT educated CS engineer with founder, et cetera. And he builds products. So forgive us for the technical talk. That said, you said something at the beginning, Niel, which was about HR software. I want to continue to take advantage of your expertise, which is HR software is this unique thing, which is people pay oodles of money for and a site license for every employee, and people log in once a year and that's it. How does Winslow change that? And you had stated at the beginning, which was good marketing banter. Maybe it's marketing banter, maybe it's real. How do you actually make it real in your product?
Yeah. So two things. One is we threw away the traditional per employee pricing model for HR tools, and we have a usage-based model. And so that's a big step in the industry.
Yeah, no, that's big.
Yeah. Most of the industry, the Workdays of the world are propped up because they charge, $7 to $25, depending on the number of modules you have per employee per month, regardless of people logging into their software or not, right? Just a huge amount of that industry. It's just like wasted on software that's being spent and no one's using it. So we have a complete usage-based model based on how much you exercise our AI technology. That's a tactical solution to the problem. But here's the real solution to the problem is it turns out that many things that people would do to make their lives more productive as employees involve employee data. So for example, let's say that I am the CEO of a company and I really want to welcome every new employee to the company because we're growing very quickly. And so I want to send them a Slack message on the second day that they're employed. Say, hey, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Here's my Calendly link. Why don't you grab some time with me, 30 minutes on Zoom? I'd really love to just have a chat with you, get to know you. And then if they forget to do that, you want to send them a reminder in a few days. And if they don't get around to doing it, you want to ping their manager and say, hey, can you make sure this person does it? You can go into our Slack bot and literally say that. When an employee starts on their second day, send them a DM, send them my Calendly. If they don't respond in 3 days, send them a reminder. If they don't respond in 7 days, send the manager a reminder. You hit go, and we scaffold up everything agentically in the back end to do that for you. So if you kind of know behind the scenes what's happening there, you're listening to events from the system, you're managing scheduling, you've got skills files that are getting built. We all do that completely automatically in the back end, which is what I called our chief of staff. But that piece of productivity that I want, it needs to know about managers, it needs to know about start dates. And so if you dig through all of these things that people really want to do with, for example, data, if you're in the sales team, you want to say, hey, I want to see how long it takes for my sales team to become productive. So go and take a report of all of my closes and also get a report from Winslow of start dates, put them together and just build me a graph of how long it takes for people to start closing. That's employee data from our database and sales data from HubSpot or ADIO or whatever you have. There's so many things that make your job more productive that require a little bit of knowledge that comes from the HR system that you don't even touch now because you can't get access to it. So when you give people these tools, it unlocks this massive amount of creativity, which creates productivity in the system. And all of a sudden, the HR product is something you use every day, not something you use 1, 2, 3 times a year. That's the unlock that I realized. And as we started to do it for our own company, you're like, this is amazing. The other thing that we did in our business is HR systems are traditionally read-only. You cannot build a product that writes into them. Our product is writable. So you can go and create, let's say that you build your own performance management tool in Lovable. You just want to go vibe code something very specific to your company. You can go build a performance management tool. And then with our product, you can actually push the results of the performance management of an employee onto their employee record. It's stored in Winslow on their record. And now that becomes queryable. So a CEO could say, I have a meeting with Andy in a couple of days, pull up his last performance review, and it will just go get that out of the employee record. No, I've got to go into Lattice or a third-party system and pull that down and merge it together with the record. You want your employee data to be like a CRM system. It's sucking in all of the digital exhaust for everything to do with that employee and the work they're doing. So you can do analysis and you can build tools on top of it. It's a whole mentality of how to think about the power of an AI native architecture inside of an organization and the unlocks that you get to make people more productive.
Niel, given you're building tools for HR professionals, predominantly of smaller companies, can you talk about the changes and stresses on HR professionals in the last 12 to 24 months and things that have surprised you just about the job and the market and how it's changed?
Yeah. So I think AI has been a challenging technology for HR professionals for a few reasons. One is it's generally not a technical organization. And this has actually been one of the things that's really unfortunate about HR for a long time because it's not a technical organization. They've kind of had to go hat in hand to IT all the time and say, I really need an integration done. I really want this thing built. They're kind of very deferential to what IT lets them do. And they're kind of in many cases not as empowered as they could be. The thing that's amazing about modern tools, AI native tools, as I mentioned, were 100% extensible. They could build anything they want now. They don't have to go ask IT for anything anymore. So there's this moment where all of a sudden the lack of technical depth is not actually that big of a barrier anymore. And the platforms allow them to actually start building what they want. So our positioning in the market is build HR the way you've always wanted. It's an empowerment.
So Niel, let me interrupt you for a moment. I'm trying to get you off of Winslow and to comment more on the market and the people. I'm just aware of who our audience is. I'll put this last plug in, which is if you're thinking about needing or wanting to empower your HR professionals, go to usewinslow.com. Check it out. Now, I want to talk about three things in the last 15 minutes. One is HR professionals and how their job has changed as a result of agents and AI. Because the workforce is fucking changing. Excuse my French. Let's talk there. The second thing I want to talk about is org design. And the third thing I want to talk about is the fear of employees because of AI and agents, which changes the job of the HR professional materially, that fear.
Yeah.
So pick any of those and opine on that and not Winslow, the product.
Yeah. Okay. So the things are all coming, right? So let's take organizational design. I think in general, what we're seeing emerge is what I call the triangle design, right? Which is historically you've had the head of department and underneath them, you've had the way that stuff gets done, which is people, right? And then over here, you've had some kind of operations role, right? So let's take HR, for example. You've had the HR CHRO over here, benefit specialists, payroll specialists, HR generalists, HR BPs, tons and tons of people that kind of get tactical things done. And over here, you've had sort of people ops working around for a second. This is being gobbled by software. This is all AI. So slowly but surely, all of the how things get done is software, intelligence, agents, et cetera. What it's doing is it's causing the people ops role to become very, very, very important. So you see the people ops role moving much into the foreground where it used to be in the background. And that is because people ops are traditionally a combination of technical, they understand business, they understand people, they understand workflow. That's premium role. You're seeing this in all organizations now. We think the same thing in sales, right? You've had salespeople. This is being gobbled by AI BDRs and SDRs. But now the sales ops role, it's very, very important. You got to glue it all together, right? Same thing in marketing tech, same thing in fintech, same thing in DevOps. It's the exact same triangle that's happening. So HR teams are sort of trying to figure out how to reorganize around this sort of triangle structure where the ops role becomes much, much more important. The reason I bring up the technical is because HR traditionally has been an organization that hasn't been able to move that independently. They've really required other parts of the organization to do things for them. That's not true anymore with AI. They have the ability to build things themselves. That actually empowers them in a totally new way to go and construct what they want. They've also been pretty limited because these big monolithic platforms that have existed for a long time have kind of forced them to do things the way that the monolithic platforms wanted them to. And so they've been kind of constrained by their IT department, they've been constrained by these platforms. And they haven't just been able to build what the organization needs because they don't have the technical skills. Not true anymore with live coding tools. Independent of our platform, you can still go do this independently. This is a really big sea change for HR teams where all of a sudden the things you couldn't do and the things you had to beg for before, you can now do. It's amazing. They woke up and had a whole bunch of toys under the Christmas tree. It's great, right? So they're trying to learn those things and adjust those things and figure out how to do change management on those things. One of the downsides, for example, of vibe coding tools is people get excited. They start building a bunch of stuff and then they have to maintain it. Obviously there's a lot of storyline about that, but also all of the data that those things generate are sitting in a bunch of different places now and they don't have it centralized anywhere. So they're starting to grapple with things like centralization of data, cleanliness of data. There's all these kind of very practical, tactical things that happen once you start to empower an organization to do things in a consistent way with AI because AI needs a source. And so they're kind of getting sucked into a lot of cleanup work that they have kind of avoided for a long time. It's if you build a sales organization, at some point in time, you go, Salesforce is a mess. We need to go clean up all this data because we've got all sorts of different stuff lying around and we can't run reports really well. And it's all coming out kind of wonky. It's the same thing in HR. You give them a bunch of AI tools, they get super excited, they go build a bunch of stuff and they realize, okay, our house is kind of not in great order. We have to stop and kind of go spend time and energy on that. That's what we're seeing a lot of people grapple with. And then HR teams are really struggling with the flow of very sensitive information through AI systems. So for example, I could go into any AI tool and any product, whether it's ChatGPT or Glean or Linear or whatever, and I could type in, I just got diagnosed with stage 5 cancer. I live at this address. I need to find an oncologist near me. I've pumped huge amounts of PII into a chatbot. And how does that information flow through the supply chain? Where does it get stored? So rightly so, HR people's hair is on fire a little bit about data protection, compliance, supply chain stuff. And so the thing that I find, which I think is challenging, is I think sometimes they let those issues get a little bit in their way of making forward progress. And they kind of need to find a balance between being like hyper conservative about all the risks there and also taking advantage of the opportunities to kind of operate in a different way. So, I mean, that kind of like thing that you're thinking about. I mean, that's
Adam, you have anything you want to chime in or ask here?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm still on Niel's epiphanies, by the way, because I'm going to apply that at a broader level. Like what I think is so interesting about what Niel is saying, and I think it's ironic / interesting that he's talking about it from an HR perspective, but you said it, Niel, it could apply to a lot of functions, which is
Adam,
like,
just to get, which piece of his epiphanies are you referring to?
Well, the two epiphanies, as I understood them, maybe I'm sort of blending them, but in the triangle organization, as you kind of put it, but in general, you used to have like data that was housed in systems of record software, that somebody's job was to understand how to access that system of record software as part of their overall job. They reported up to a broader organization that at times, either within that function or in general, would need that person to go access that system that housed that data. And what Niel's epiphany is like, there's actually two layers there that are not necessary in the age of generative AI, theoretically, which is that you don't need a person to then go interact with a deterministic software interface that's housing data. In some senses, you can go straight to an intelligent agent yourself in a conversational manner and skip two of those steps. I don't need the person and I don't need the system of record. I need the data. Okay. I need the data and I need it in a read write. I need it secure. I need it organized with a semantic layer, but I don't need the person or the software layer that I used to need in a sense, because I can just go, because if you think about all that is that there's software that's allowing the data to be accessed and visible and queryable by a person that knows how to use that software, but an agent or an intelligence system, it just needs a connector into either that system directly, which eliminates the need for the person perhaps on some level, but it doesn't need the interface either, like Niel said. The other epiphany is like so much of our stuff is being designed for a human. It's like, no, just give my intelligent agent access to either the system of record or frankly, decompose a layer below that to the actual system of records. All that system of record is doing is like housing, organizing, and giving access to that data. So, and the intelligence layer itself not only can do all that, but it's not just an order taker. Like I used to just go tell a person to go get me this thing. It's actually going to be better at helping you get to why you needed that data in the first place anyways. It's like, what am I trying to accomplish with that data? Oh, I'm really trying to figure out this insight over here. I'm trying to do whatever. And that's, so I just was like struck by Niel's point. He's talking about Winslow in some ways in the epiphany, but I actually think it goes right to the heart of what we've been saying, Andy, and what Niel is saying too, which is like the pathways that we've all built in terms of human organization and technology organization are going to be completely rewritten and have to be unlearned.
Well, like I give an example, like we use HubSpot and like all kind of systems like that end up with a complicated reporting product, like a dashboard product. It's just the nature of every single SaaS product ever. And I beat my head against the wall every time I need to go and try to get data out of HubSpot because their reporting interface is very complex, sophisticated, use whatever word you want. Not anymore. I attach their MCP and I just say what I want and it gets it. And so I literally was doing what you were saying before, Adam. I was working with a fractional marketing person who knew HubSpot really well. I would tell her what I wanted. She would go into HubSpot, create the report, stick it on the dashboard for me. And I was like, this seems insane. And so now I'm just like going to Claude and say, I want this piece of data. And you can schedule it and send it to me every morning at 3 a.m. into my Slack channel. I have so much of that stuff in Claude.
Yeah, Niel, just to build on that for a second, which is what's so interesting to me about what you're saying is, hey, if you're right that the thing you wanted was exactly the right thing to go gather, great. We've just talked about how, why do I need to go ask this person who knows how to use HubSpot to then go get this thing out of HubSpot? I can just go to my agent and ask my agent with the connector to just go do that for me and format it in the way I want, right? But there's another benefit of using an agent, which is like, are you sure that that's even what you needed? I mean, probably is, but maybe not. If you start with being an output manager of like, what am I trying to accomplish? Why did I even want that data in the first place? And you go to the agent and say, I'm trying to accomplish this. My normal thing would be to go ask somebody to go get this out of HubSpot. You get the benefit of an agent that says, well, actually, if you're trying to accomplish that, there might be a better way to go get that insight. And I'm going to go get that for you. Or you might be right. And I'm just going to skip the step. Either way, you're like faster and better off using an agent in this. And it's crazy that we're talking about this in a world where none of this was possible a year ago.
I have a friend that works at NVIDIA, a very smart guy. And he and I call this planning mode. And planning mode is like when you're working with someone or talking to someone and they're having you qualify a lot of the questions about the thing you're asking to do. And I think like this is maybe a way to articulate the second epiphany, which is I might say, hey, I want to onboard this new employee, make sure there's all this information in the offer letter. But it's actually not the HR system that's saying, did you know that a gym membership is classified this way? Did you realize that the sales commission should be set up this way? But make sure that you get this information to the bank account because of this time frame process that has to happen for pulling on this payroll. It's actually Claude that's doing it. And so like it feels like our product or an HR product or whatever is very, very, very smart, but it's actually Claude that's very, very, very smart. But our product has enabled us to work in tandem with it. And like that's the unlock where you're like any single the software you use has the infinity of the knowledge of the universe at its disposal if you've built an agentic version of it where it can kind of go back and forth like that. So like our product doesn't need to like have a wizard in it that says, do they have a severance payment? Do they have a this? Okay, it's severance in California needs to be structured this way. Claude is just sort of like interrupting you, trying to get something done and being like, by the way, there's all this stuff you need to know. Can you tell me a bunch of your choices? And then it's negotiating with the MCP of the underlying SaaS product to figure out how to get that into the system of record.
And he's dying because Andy's dying because he didn't want this conversation to go this way at all. Instead, you and I are just nerding out on like the possibilities of these systems. He wants to talk about like how many people are going to lose their job and what the unemployment rate is going to be next year.
And let me go back because we're running low on time. I'm interested in this topic too. It's just I think our audience might not be.
He thinks that, but usually they are. So it's okay, Neil.
Yeah.
But go ahead, Andy.
What I want to pick up on is what you were saying before. So I'll bridge the gap, which is you had said, employees' sensitive information is now being sucked into your product and going through an MCP server. And that changes the HR professional, the human professional's job. And there's some employee concern of that. I want to sort of go back to the level of fear around that we're seeing in enterprises and of employees about being laid off because of AI, which totally changed. Like HR professionals now need to deal with that all the time when they're told to interact with new software. And at the same time, I might be more comfortable talking to AI Claude about what's going on in the workplace than I am the HR professional.
Yep.
Like it's relatively unbiased and my PII data might be being leaked out, but there's a lot of questionable, perhaps amoral, unethical things that I don't know about or know how to deal about as an employee that I'm having to make choices. And I might feel more confident talking to Claude than I am through Winslow than I am the HR professional. Are you seeing any of that?
All of the data and the surveys out there actually point to exactly what you said, which is many times humans will bring up tricky workplace issues with AI because it's dispassionate, has no dog in the fight. I mean,
it's
maybe
safer.
an employee, it's safer. And maybe an employee heard that their friend went and talked to HR, didn't have a great experience. They don't want to have that. There's a lot of that stuff that goes on. Even HR professionals will tell you that this is what they see as well. But that doesn't obfuscate the need for HR professionals. I think the problem is that the HR profession has had the most important parts of it buried in clerical work. So you have these people that join the industry because they want to help humans. They want to help organizations. They want to help, set strategic direction. And then their inbox of just hey, do we have President's Day off? Hey, can you help me figure out what my deductible is so deep that they never, ever get to the core nougaty golden stuff. And so the positive promise of AI is have AI do all the clerical stuff And all of a sudden, you now get to work on the stuff that you actually really care about. And that, I think, unlocks a massive amount of opportunity and potential for HR to be a driver and a contributor to organizations in a way that it hasn't been before, because it's been so very busy just like dealing with tactical BS. I will also say that I think, personal opinion, we are in a moment in time where it feels like there's a contracting force and an expanding force, and the two things haven't rationalized yet. The contracting force is AI can do a lot of these tactical clerical jobs. And what I mentioned in the like how stuff gets done category, a payroll specialist, a benefits specialist, a lot of that stuff can be done in the end by AI and will be done in the end by AI. There's a contracting force, clearly. This is true in every single department. But there's an expanding force, which is, as you guys know, the surface area that you can attack as a company now because of AI is increasing really, really heavily. And as that starts to happen, the opportunity to plug yourself into an organization and be valuable in there grows with it. And like those two things have not rationalized yet. So you have a contracting force that people perceive and get scared about, but they haven't seen the benefit of the expansion force yet. You see this in small companies that are doing like 100 million of revenue with 50 employees. Like you see that happening, but it hasn't really manifested itself in larger companies yet, but I think it will. And once it does, people will feel more confident that it's not about mass layoffs and the apocalypse is here. It's about re-navigating in the organization to figure out where your skills can impact that expanded surface area. So
Yeah, well said.
I'm like less worried about, the economic drama in the next 5 years. I just think there's a little bit of a tale of two cities going on right now. And like, we'll figure out that it's actually the same thing and like where the connection points are. That's what I think is going to happen. Like,
Great. That's great.
makes sense.
With that, I'll turn it to Adam. Adam, anything you want to highlight for our audience as we close out?
No, I mean, Niel, this is great. We haven't really talked a lot about, systems of record and how they can be sort of rethought through in an agentic way. And I thought that was a cool way to introduce it to our audience.
Yeah. I mean, it was not the conversation that I anticipated having. I do think that the epiphanies that you shared and the evolution, really the disregard for user interface to software products and being able to throw that away in the trash. And like everybody that's listening to this podcast can relate to, particularly on government websites, where the hell is that button, and just how hard it is to build products that feel intuitive. I mean, it was Google's invention. Here is the box and here's the button, right? Like we're stripping everything else away. The fact that that is all gone and we're now interfacing in a conversational manner, sometimes often in the new case via voice, we're in a whole new world. And I think you gave frontline views of those epiphanies to our audience, and thanks for joining. And I think they'll take from it what they will. With that, I want to say thank you to Niel for joining. He dialed in at 7 a.m. from Sydney, Australia to join this podcast. So thank you, Niel. And thank you to our audience for listening to AI First with Adam and Andy. For more info on how to become AI First, head to forum3.com. You find case studies, research briefings, executive summaries, and our new book, Agents Inc., How to Rebuild Your Company in the AI Age. And there you can meet Vera, our AI agentic co-author, who's always up for a conversation. If you want to connect with other leaders doing this work, join the AI First community, our hub for turning AI hype into action. Onward.